Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Show. We have a very special guest with us this evening, Dr. Daniel Pipes, the president of the Middle East Forum and Tovey Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. Dr. Pipes has written 12 books, including Militant Islam Reaches America. You can visit Dr. Pipes' website at danielpipes.org. Dr. Pipes is joining us this evening to discuss the controversy recently sparked by Newt Gingrich, who on a Jewish television station called the Palestinians, quote, an invented people. Now, despite the usual suspects coming forward to denounce Newt Gingrich, the question remains, is what Newt said a historical fact? We have the main and leading expert on this issue with us today. Dr. Pipes, it is a pleasure and a privilege to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Pipes. Dr. Pipes, in the year 2000, in the Jerusalem Post, an article by you appeared, The Year the Arabs Discovered Palestine. A longer version of that article appeared a little bit earlier in the summer of 1989 in the Middle East Review. Dr. Pipes, that article substantiates what Newt Gingrich has said, and apparently 1920 is a very significant year. Can you give us your wisdom on this issue?
Sure, my pleasure, yes. Newt Gingrich said in one sentence what took me some 8,000 words. I note that first.
Can you speak up a little bit just to make sure our listeners hear you?
Historically, Jews have the concept of haaretz, the land, and Christians the notion of terra sancta, the sacred land, which refers, roughly speaking, to the area that Israel presently occupies. Muslims have no such concept. There is no notion of a Palestine, of a holy land in Islam. And there has been historically no Muslim polity, no Muslim government that specifically covered that area, the Christian and Jewish polities. And so in 1918, when the British conquered this area and called it Palestine, it was a victory for the Zionist movement to have an area delineated called Palestine that included terra sancta haaretz. The Muslims initially responded to this new notion by rejecting it. They considered themselves primarily to be Syrians. The notion of Syria, which we today ascribe to the state of Syria, historically refers to a larger area that includes the state of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, the Palestinian areas, and Jordan. It's a geographic cultural notion analogous to Scandinavia. There's never been a Scandinavia, a country called Scandinavia, but it's a cultural geographic region. It is clearly delineated. People understand what it means. Sham, or Syria, was likewise a historic region. And that's what the people of this area consider themselves to be: Syrians, Muslim, Arabic speakers. But this notion of Palestine exists because the people now of this unit called Palestine, created by the British after World War I, because they had to deal with the institutions of Palestine, they reluctantly agreed to present themselves as Palestinians. It was an official, reluctant act. Between 1920 and today, the notion of Palestine has grown. It's no longer just something done in order to fit into the British imperial structure. It's now something that has a life of its own. And I don't deny that. I don't say that Palestinian nationalism is a fraud. No, it's real, very real. But it's very clear at the same time that the notion of Palestine, Palestinian, goes back last century. And that's, in this sense, Gingrich is absolutely right. Now, many of the criticisms of Gingrich have been around the fact that there are other invented nationalities. For example, Jordan.
Dr. Pipes, sorry to interrupt. I'm getting feedback from our chat room that the listeners are having a hard time hearing you. Kindly just speak up a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. There are other invented nationalities. For example, Jordan came into existence just a year later, in 1921. There's no historic Jordan that goes back hundreds of years or millennia. The difference is that no one is claiming that there's a Jordanian nationality that goes back centuries and millennia. But there are people who are claiming there's such an identity for Palestinians. For example, the PLO has long said that Jesus was a Palestinian, Or they argue that the Jebusites, people of the Bible, were the first Palestinians. The Canaanites were Palestinians. And so this notion of Palestinian has been extended backwards for millennia. That's a fraud. There is no such concept. The notion of Palestinian came into existence less than a century ago.
Dr. Pipes, here's another problem. When the Palestinians do speak of a homeland, which now I guess we're seeing historically never really ever existed, but even when they speak of a homeland, where exactly is it? It's not really in the West Bank. It's not in Gaza. Are we correct that it's in Israel? When they speak of a homeland, it really means that they want to destroy Israel.
Absolutely. The maps of the Palestinian Authority, and more broadly, the maps that you'll find in Arabic of Palestine, invariably show all of mandatory Palestine. In other words, all of Israel is included within it. I have never seen a map in Arabic or produced by Arabs that shows a Palestine next to an Israel. Never.
Dr. Pipes, is it an exaggeration? Is it accurate to say the following, that the Palestinians were actually invented as a weapon to destroy Israel?
Well, as I said, the notion of Palestinian goes back to the First World War, the aftermath of the First World War. At that time, the term Palestine was a Zionist term. In other words, creating a unit called Palestine was an achievement for the Jewish national movement. And the Zionist movement celebrated it.
And the Muslim Arabs actually opposed it.
Right. There was the Palestine Post, the Palestine Symphony, the Palestine this, the Palestine that, and it was Zionist. But in 1948, the Zionists abandoned the term Palestine and adopted the term Israel, leaving this term available for the anti-Zionists, who then picked it up and over the years have made it their term. So now Palestinian represents anti-Israel, and indeed, again, if one looks at maps, one sees that Palestine replaces Israel.
So let me ask this then. How do we give the Palestinians a homeland when in fact the very existence of the Palestinians depends on destroying Israel? Is there not something incompatible happening here?
The conventional answer to that is to create a Palestine adjoining Israel, the so-called two-state solution, which is the policy of the U.S. government and reluctantly the policy of the Israeli government, and also formally speaking the policy of the Palestinian Authority. I would say that that is not feasible. That were there to come into existence a Palestine that's made up of the Bank or the West Bank and Gaza, it would be primarily devoted to eliminating Israel. It would not be a good neighbor. It would not be. The rulers of this statelet would not be content with what territory they're given. They would be wholly engaged in eliminating Israel, and therefore it's not workable. What's the point?
Yeah. Now,
let's be realistic.
Now, Dr. Pipes, a lot of people do not know this, but inside this whole charade, inside this whole lie about the Palestinian people, Palestinian homeland, etc., actually the KGB's hand is involved here. Could you just briefly speak on that in the context of that people like Arafat and this whole thing, they were actually trained by the KGB, and some of this has been influenced by the KGB?
No question that the Soviets in the 60s in particular used this nascent Palestinian movement as a vehicle for their own ends. Israel was the American ally. The Soviets glommed on to this Palestinian movement and trained either in the Soviet Union itself or in Soviet bloc countries, Soviet advisors, Soviet arms, Soviet money, the PLO, yes.
Now, I recommend for all of our listeners to go to danielpipes.org and to read Daniel Pipes' article, "The Year the Arabs Discovered Palestine." I mean, so many facts there that a lot of people didn't know, and I was surprised to read a few things. Dr. Pipes, I mean, you write in that article that in fact national sentiment was actually taught to the Arabs and Muslims by Europeans, that there wasn't even a sense of nationalism among Arabs and Muslims. Am I correct?
Nationalism is an import to the Muslim-majority countries, just as, say, using forks and knives or wearing a tie.
Mm-hmm.
These are European customs, ideas, institutions that were exported to live into the Middle East that had no historic basis. In other words, pre-modern Middle East had the family, clan, tribe on the one hand, and the world of Muslims, the Ummah, the community of Muslims on the other hand. So one rather small, tribes can be large, and the other quasi-universal. There was no allegiance to the state. In other words, they were always states. Take Egypt. Egypt is a state that goes back thousands of years, and it's pretty much always been the same Egypt. It's like an island surrounded by desert. And Egypt has been ruled by many different leaders, dynasties. But through the Muslim period, until modern time, there's very little allegiance to Egypt or to the Egyptian government. It wasn't important. It would be like for Americans, we are all living in a county. We're all residents of a county. Who will proclaim his county to be his identity? It's just a bureaucratic delineation that has no particular importance to our identity. Who would die for his county? These are not important units. Likewise, the government of Egypt had no importance. And there's no nationalism. There's no sense that Egypt is your country and your identity. And Egypt at least has a historic existence, whereas a place like Sham or Syria has no. It's just a vague notion. No reality, no governmental reality.
Well, this phenomenon, in fact, alone legitimizes what Gingrich is saying. Dr. Pipes, you say something very intriguing in your article. Quote, the primacy of Palestinian nationalism could eventually come to an end, perhaps as quickly as it got started. What do you think about that today, 12 years later, after writing that article?
I see identities in the Middle East as fluid. That in one era, one is Egyptian, another one is Arab, third one is Muslim, and likewise with people who we're now calling Palestinian. Hamas, for example, doesn't particularly emphasize the Palestinian nature of the Gaza that it rules. It emphasizes the Islamic nature. So I can imagine that the drive towards a Palestinian state having failed, the people who call themselves today Palestinians would rather lose interest, could take up some other identity. There's fluidity. There are alternatives. It changes. For example, the drive against Zionism has had four different natures over the last century. It was, until 1943, primarily pan-Syrian, that's Sham, and until 1967, primarily pan-Arab, the idea that Arabs from rock are part of a single state. Then it was Palestinian in the sense of the flag and a country, Palestine. And now there's a fourth dimension, which is Islamic. So it's extremely complex. Things are fluid. These are not they're not fixed identities. They change over time. And you take a country like Jordan, extremely complex, that you have the East Bankers and the West Bankers, Bedouin, Palestinian, relationship between them. King is a Bedouin, queen is a Palestinian. The military is, and the security forces are Bedouin. Commercial leadership is Palestinian. Very complex.
Dr. Pipes, Gingrich is taking a lot of heat here. I mean, we live in a world where you simply can't say the truth. He's being attacked, but at the same time, is it not true that within the PLO charter, within the statements of many Arab leaders and even Palestinian leaders, this also has been admitted over the years?
Yes, many.
Can you give us an example of maybe something in the charter or maybe some things that the leaders themselves